So now we're going to talk about variables. Variables are a way of storing data or information that you may want to keep for later, or it's a way of storing information that you may not know at the beginning of a code. For example, if you ask for a user input, you're not going to know the user input at the beginning, so you're going to store it in a variable. And so variables are very convenient because they let you save information and they let you use this information later. I'll show you an example of a variable. So for example, if I want to store the number 1, I can create a variable, and I'm going to type the variable name first, and the variable name is going to be 1, and then I'm going to put in the equals, and this is an assignment operator. So this means the variable with the name 1 is going to be equal to, and then I'm going to put the value. And the value that I'm going to assign to the variable 1 is going to be the number 1. So I can create a second variable, for example. Let's call this variable 2. And I'm going to assign it using the equals operator. I'm going to assign it the value 2. And now I can do this again, and I can do, for example, the variable 3. And once again here, I can also assign it the value 3. And so now what I've done here is I've created 3 different variables named 1, which has the value 1, 2, which has the value 2, and 3, which has the value 3. And now these are 3 different variables, and I can call them and I can do different things with them, and they don't really affect each other. So to show you that I've actually created them, I'm going to use something called the print function. And function just lets me print output to the screen so that we can see it. And you'll be seeing this a lot later, and we'll get to know about functions too, but right now I'm just going to use this so that we can always see what we're actually doing. So the way this works is I'm just going to put in the print statement, and you'll notice it gets colored because I'm in the developing environment. And then inside I'm going to put my variable. So inside I'm going to print 1. And then on a new line I'm going to print 2. And then on the next line I'm going to print the variable 3. And so now if we run this code, we're going to see 1, which corresponds to the print 1, which corresponds to printing the variable named 1, and the variable named 1 was assigned the value 1 up here. And then we print the variable 2, which has the value 2 that we assigned up here, and so we print out the 2, and then we print 3, which has the value 3 assigned up here. And now we can also print backwards. So if we print 2 and print 1, and we run this code again, we're going to print 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. So we can reuse variables. And so we see we've had the variable 1 here, which prints the 1. This 2 is assigned the 2, so it prints the 2. And this 3 is assigned the 3 here, so it prints this 3. And then we go backwards, 2 prints the 2, and 1 gives the 1. So this is the nice thing about variables, that we can kind of reuse them too. So now what happens if I do something like this? If I overwrite my variable, so now I'm going to say 2 is actually equal to 4. Well, what happens is I'm going to change the value of the variable 2. So right now I have my variable 1, which is 1, and I have my variable 2, which is 2 up here, and I have my variable 3, which is 3, and now I assign a new value to the variable 2, and that value is 4. And so now I print 2, but 2 no longer has the value 2 up here. 2 now has a new value, which is 4. And so what I've done is I've modified the variable, or I've overwritten the data. We'll call it whatever you like. But I've changed the value of the data inside. And what happens is my computer looks at the last known value, and then it prints this to me. And so what happens when I modify the value is that the value that's stored inside the computer actually gets changed. And so this is why I have this new value. Now what I've created here are variables of a certain type, and all of these variables are integers, as you can see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, these are all whole numbers or integers. There are also different types of variables that I can create. For example, I can create decimals. So I can create, for example, the variable 1.1. So this is a decimal value. This is the decimal variable. And I can also print this. And so let's see what happens when we print this. Well, we get our 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, as we did from up here. and then we get our 1.1 from printing the decimal. Well, what we can also do is we can create a variable that is a string. So we're going to call it string var. So this stands for string variable. And you'll notice that I capitalize the letters. Every time there's a new word, I capitalize the letters. You don't have to do this. This is just good convention. It makes the code easier to read. And I'm going to create a string. So I'm going to create a series of characters. And I'm just going to put in here, hello. And now once again, I can also print string var. And so I got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, my 1.1, and now I've also got hello. So these are different types of variables. So this variable type here is a string. This variable type here is a decimal, or it's called a float in Python, but that's just a different type. And this variable type here is an integer, or a whole number, but in programming it's called integers. So variables are just a broad thing, and in Python I don't have to tell the computer what type I want my variable to be. It figures it out automatically, and I can just assign a value to this variable, and it's going to store it in memory for me to use later. Now there are some problems though. If I, for example, create my string var and I make it a string, and now if I want to add something to it, so if I want to have my string var and I want to add, for example, the number 1, then this is going to give me an error. And this is because I've created a string here, and now I want to add an integer to it. But my variable can't be both of type integer or of type string, so I have to choose. And there are some workarounds to this later that I will also show you, and I can actually change my 1, for example, to a string, and now this will work again, because now, even though my 1 is technically a number, because I put the quotation marks around it, it's now interpreted as a string. And so now this variable is whole again, and all the elements are strings, and so the variable type is still a string, and so I no longer get an error. Okay, so another thing that you should know about all these variables is that all these variables that we've created right now are called global variables. So that means because they're not contained inside any functions, and you'll hear a lot more about functions later, but because they are kind of in the core of the code and they're not any subsection of anything, they're global variables and I can access them from anywhere. And so this, for example, would be a really great place to write constants. So, for example, if I want to create a constant pi because I want to do a lot of math and I give it the value 3.14, because I created this without it being in any subsection of anything, I can access it from anywhere. And whenever I type pi, or whenever I want to use pi, here we go, we get the value 3.14. So I can access it from everywhere. So this is a global variable. These are all actually global variables. So an example of a local variable would be if I put it inside of a function. So, and you'll see functions later. I'll just give you the general format right now, but don't worry, we'll also come back to this. If I define a function, and I call it function name, and I give it some input, and then I do an action, and then I return some output. So this is kind of the general structure of a function, but once again, we'll go over this later, so don't worry. And now if I create a new variable here, so let's say new var, and I give this the value world, then what I've created inside here is actually a local variable. And so just to kind of give you the idea of how this looks like, I'm just going to create this function, and you don't really have to understand what the function does, but this function is just to show you that the variable in here I can't access from anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the variable in here, the value of the variable, so we're going to print world. And then I'm going to try to print the value once again outside. And now, because I created a function, I actually have to run it. But once again, don't worry about this. We'll come back to all this later. And I'm just going to comment out all of this code right now so that we only see these results. Alright, so let's run it. Well, if we go up before our program crashed, we actually see the word world printed. And so what we did is we went into the function here, we created our local variable world, or our new var, which has the value world, and then we print it. And then this means that we go out of the function again. So now we're out of the function, and now we try to print the variable new var. But because it's only locally defined inside here, it actually doesn't exist on this level. And so my computer gives me an error because it's telling me this variable is not defined because it's not a global variable. Now, there are ways that I can, for example, use global variables inside functions. So if I wanted to use my number 1 in here, then the way I could do this is I can either call 1 because it's a global variable, but to let everyone know that it's a global variable, I'm actually going to put in global 1. And then also here, I'm going to print 1. And so I'm just going to uncomment this 1 here to make sure that we've defined it again, because everything that's commented is not actually part of the program, it's just for reading, but it doesn't get executed. And so let's just run this again, and let's comment out this so that we don't get an error, and let's just see the output that we get. So we see that with global 1 defined in here, we print 1, which is the value 1, which is defined up here, and we also print the value of the new var, which is world, which we see right here. So this is a local variable, and this is a global variable. Now, technically, I can also take this out. And because this is a global variable, I can access this from anywhere. So my function is still going to work. And because this is just one level above the function, and it's global, and I can access it from anywhere, my program does not complain, it doesn't give me an error, and that's just because whatever I want to do, it exists, it's already defined, the program knows exactly what I'm talking about. So that's the difference between global and local variables, and it depends on where you define them. And if you define stuff within functions, then you would be creating local variables, and you can't access these outside of these function subsections. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So, what are some other things that I can do with variables? Well, let's take all the comments out again. And I'm actually going to show you one more way that you can define variables, and it's kind of a shorthand notation. So instead of doing 1, 2, 3 like this, let's just comment this out. You can also define it 1, comma, 2, comma, 3. Give it the assignment, the equals operator, and then we'll give it the values. We're going to give it 1, comma, 2, comma, 3. So now what it assigns the value 1 to the variable 1, it assigns the value 2 to the variable 2, and it assigns the value 3 to the variable 3. And so this is just kind of a shorthand or an easier way to kind of write everything so that I don't have to write it line by line, but that I can just write it all on the same line. And if we run our code, it's still going to work. We're still going to get our 1, 2, 3, and you'll notice that because the code is commented out here, this is actually where everything is defined. And so we get our 1, and our 2, and our 3, just like the way we defined it here. And then we get all the other output that we've created below. So, what else can I do to variables? Well, let's say I want to create a new variable that is the sum of 2 previous variables. So let's say I'm going to have my variable 5, and I don't want 5 just to be equal to plain old 5. I want 5 to be equal to 3 plus 2. Now this is something that you can do too, and if we print the value of 5, we'll actually see that it works just as well, and it doesn't make a difference. So what is something that you can't do, for example? You can't do 5 plus 6. So now I'm trying to create the variables 5 plus 6. And if I just leave it like this, I'm going to get an error. And that's because I have one value on this side, so I've got the 3 plus 2, and this is actually the same as 5. So I've got one value on this side, but I've got two variables on this side, and both of them are undefined. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense, because the computer doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. I can't define the sum of two undefined variables and give it a value. So these are some things that you should watch out for. Another thing that you, for example, can't do is you can't say 5 is equal to 5. So if we try to run this, once again we'll get an error. And this is because everything to the left of the equals is what you're giving the value to, and everything right is what the value is. So everything to the left is what you're giving the value to, and everything to the right is what the value is. So that's why the variable name comes on the left side, because that's what we're giving the value to, and that's why we put the value on the right, because that's what the value is. So we're assigning the value 5 to the variable 5, and then everything will work again smoothly. Now, let's say that we create a counting variable. And so counting variables are very nice, and you'll use them a lot later in programming. But I'll just kind of show you a quick introduction to this. So the idea is that I create a counter, and I'm going to give this value, or this variable, the value 0. So far nothing's happened. And I can use these later to count for every time something has happened. And so how do I change the value of the count if I don't want to just, write now count is equal to 1 and count is equal to 2 and so forth? So there are ways that I can do this too. So let's print out the value of count first, and because we're getting a lot of output, I'm just going to take out all of the print statements above here to make sure we only actually see the last thing that we've created. So let's see what we print out. We still have our variable pi, so we'll comment that out too. So let's run this again, and we see that we're printing the count, and right now count has the value 0. Well, let's make the value of count 1. So there are several ways we can do this. Either we can cheat and say count is equal to 1, and we can print count again, and then we'll see we print the value 1. But we can also do count is equal to count plus 1. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm assigning a value to the variable count, and that value is going to be the value of count currently plus 1. So what is the value of count currently? Well, the value of count currently, as it was last defined here, is 0. So writing count equals count plus 1 would be the same thing right now as writing count equals 0 plus 1. But writing count here gives a little bit more room for flexibility and stuff, because this value doesn't have to be 0. This value could, for example, be 7. So then it would effectively be count equals 7 plus 1. So that's the great thing of putting this here, is that it kind of gives me that flexibility, and all I do is I increment the value of count by 1. So let's see this in action. Here we see our 0, and here we see our 1, which comes from 0 plus 1. And now if we do this again, if we increment it again by 1 and print it, just to kind of really get the feel for it, we see we get 0, which comes from our initial count, we get 1, which comes from after incrementing it once, and we get 2, which comes from after incrementing it once again. So let's just fill in the count blanks again, just to kind of really understand what's going on. So count here is this count value here, which is 0. So this would effectively be writing 0 plus 1. And this count value here is this count value here, as it was last defined. And this count value here is 1. So this would effectively be writing this. So let's put in our general code again. So as you can see, writing count equals count plus 1 is a nice way of just incrementing count by 1. But there's an even easier way to do this. If I want to increment, instead of writing count equals count plus 1, I can also write count plus equals 1. And so this here is exactly the same thing as this. It's just a shorthand notation. And what this means is I add this value to the current value of count. I don't redefine it because there's not just an equal sign here, but I add to it. And so let's see this in action. And as you can see, we get 0 from here, 1 from here, and 2 from here, because it's count, which is 1, plus equals 1, so we add another 1 to it, so we get 1 plus 1, which is 2. Now, you can also do other things, for example. So let's say I don't want to add 1 here. Let's say I want to multiply. And not by 1, because that wouldn't do much, but well, let's actually do by 3, so that we see the difference between adding and multiplying. So instead of doing count equals count plus 1, I can do count equals count multiplied by 3 for just a different example. And we'll see here 0 from here, 1 from here, and our 3, which comes from multiplying the current value of count, which is 1 up here, by the value 3. And once again, you can use the shorthand notation for this, and that would be multiplied equals 3. And this would work just as well. Now I can also do the same thing as before by dividing, so I can also do count divided by 3. And so I get 0, and then I get 1 here, and then I should get a third here. And so that's what we see. And also here, the shorthand works again. And so it's important to note that there really isn't a difference between the shorthand and this version. It really is just a shorthand, but it's kind of a useful thing to know, because the more code you write, the more you're going to realize anything to do or anything to help you write less is really, really great. And so it's kind of nice to know these shorthands.